Main highways are nearly back to what they were before the quake. But building new housing for the displaced has been slower. In this camp, residents who lost all their possessions are still waiting for a grant to build a new neighborhood.
We are suffering here. We don't have water for the house. The truth is that there's been a lot of shamelessness here. That's the only way to describe it.
We are all suffering from depression here. This is going nowhere.
Opposition politicians blame the lack of progress on the right-of-centre government's decision to privatise most of the construction work.
The government cannot continue to accept poor workmanship in the service of the public. The methods they have been employing in the Biobío region are absolutely outside the law and public morality.
Pinera concedes that the work is running behind schedule, but his government says it will accelerate the outsourcing of work to private companies. Mark Orchard, AlJazeera.
Cuban government supporters have confronted a group of dissidents who want political change in that country. The so-called ladies in white were staging their usual Sunday demonstration when government supporters surrounded them and started shouting insults. The women are mostly the wives of mothers of political prisoners jailed in a 2003 roundup of intellectuals and opposition figures. This is Bolivia, where at least 400 homes have been destroyed in the capital, La Paz. A hillside collapsed after heavy rains. People began leaving their houses at the first sign of collapse, and nobody died because of that. Officials say at least 44 people have been killed in recent weeks by flooding and mudslides. South Korea has defended its right to carry out joint military drills with the US after protests from North Korea. The major annual land, sea and air exercises are held every year, and commanders insist they're purely defensive. But North Korea has threatened to turn its neighbour into a sea of fire following the drills. Talks between the two Koreas aimed at easing tensions broke down recently. The government of Malaysia is planning to tighten media regulation. It wants to put limits on the internet too, and that's raised some concerns of a crackdown on free speech. Stephanie Scowen reports.
It's the kind of news no publisher wants to hear. A planned newspaper boycott in support of free speech in Malaysia. Campaigners say if the plan to change the Printing Presses and Publications Act and the Sedition Act goes ahead, it will shackle the last vestige of press freedom in the country.
Free press in this country, I mean, the idea of free press is most of us don't feel there is such a thing as free press in that sense.
The editor of independent news portal Malaysia Kini, which is frequently critical of the government, fears the worst.
When the guidelines have been set, when the confusion has been sorted out, I see, perhaps a major crackdown against online, commentators, including, websites like Malaysia Kini.
Malaysia Kini is one of the few media outlets to take up the case of journalist Hatta Wahari. A reporter for government-backed paper Utusan Malaysia, Wahari was suspended in January for comments he made as president of the NUJ.
I'm issuing a statement that please go back to the press freedom, please do a non-biased reporting and non-partisan, that we go back to our main objective, to disseminate information to the people. We should not be a propaganda tool to any stakeholder.
Some fear the expansion of the PPPA and the Sedition Act is part of a government strategy to win back seats at the next election. Others warn a crackdown will stifle Malaysia's development and say the government needs to change tack.
If Malaysia wants to be a developed nation, it comes with democratic rights and freedom of expression. You can have a high-income economy and restrict the others.
AlJazeera asked Utusan Malaysia to explain why it was taking action against Wahari, but the paper declined to comment. Disciplinary proceedings against him have been indefinitely postponed, but Wahari remains suspended from his job. The plan to regulate the internet is a major U-turn for the government, which previously said it would never interfere with the World Wide Web. It says, though, it must now respond to threats to national security. But just exactly what those threats are, critics say, is anyone's guess. Stephanie Scowen, AlJazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
Recognise this one? Recognise the name too? Yeah, Hollywood's biggest event of the year, the 83rd Academy Awards, has come to a close. It's been Oscar night, and AlJazeera's Rob Reynolds has walked the red carpet to find out who the winners and the losers are.
And the Oscar goes to The King's Speech, Ian Canning.
The story of a stammering sovereign won Hollywood's top honor Sunday as The King's Speech scored Best Picture. Colin Firth's performance as a king tormented by a speech impediment and self-doubt earned him the Best Actor Oscar. The film world's shining stars and lesser lights strutted down the red carpet in their best tuxedos and most glamorous gowns, despite unusually chilly temperatures that set many bare shoulders shivering. This year's Best Actress award went to Natalie Portman in Black Swan for her compelling portrayal of a ballerina pushed over the edge of madness even as she achieves an artistic triumph.
This is insane, and I truly, sincerely wish that the prize tonight was to get to work with my fellow nominees. I'm so in awe of you.
A gritty boxing film scored an Oscars 1-2 punch as both Melissa Leo and Christian Bale took home Oscars for Best Supporting Actor and Actress in The Fighter. The warmest applause of the night was showered on Portman. She fell in love with the choreographer on the set of Black Swan, and they're expecting a baby boy this spring. Rob Reynolds, AlJazeera, Hollywood.
From one stage to another, here's William Hague at the UN Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva, the British Foreign Secretary.
We will raise our concerns about human rights wherever and whenever they arise, working with the grain of other societies, that we will strengthen the institutional capacity of the British government to promote human rights, and that we will be an active member of international institutions such as this Council. For it is only through collective action that we can hold nations to account and protect the weak and vulnerable. This collective action is the defining purpose of the UN Human Rights Council and is why we have assembled today. We do so against the backdrop of momentous change in Egypt and Tunisia, calls for reform and economic development in many other countries of the Middle East, and the unchecked and unacceptable violence in Libya. Last week, the Council spoke with one voice to affirm the universal rights of people in Libya and to condemn the gross and systematic violations of those rights by the Libyan authorities, including the use of heavy weaponry against civilians, the deaths of women and children, and cold-blooded incitement to violence. The resolution we agreed, announcing an independent international commission of inquiry for Libya, shows the Council working as it was intended to do. Indeed, the unanimous response to the crisis in Libya here in the Human Rights Council and at the United Nations Security Council is nothing short of remarkable. The international community came together in a way it has not done before, setting aside differences in the face of a challenge to the very notion of what we instinctively regard as the basic rights of humankind: the right to be free from terror and oppression, the right to life, and the right to raise, gather, and express views without the dread of violent retribution. Today, we have signaled that crimes will not be condoned, will not go unpunished, will not be forgotten. And this is a warning to anyone contemplating the abuse of human rights in Libya or in any other country. Stay your hand. There will be a day of reckoning, and the reach of international justice can be long. We must now maintain the momentum we have attained to ensure there can be no impunity for crimes committed in Libya and to help bring about an immediate end to the violence. Mr. President, no member state has ever been suspended from the Council before, and it is not a decision that we should take lightly. However, this is the time for us to show that we utterly condemn the actions of the Libyan government, a regime that has failed so shamefully in its responsibility to its people and that has been referred to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court should not be allowed to sit on the Human Rights Council. We urge our fellow UN member states to support the draft General Assembly resolution that will be debated in New York this week. We must also be vigilant about the potential humanitarian crisis which could develop in Libya. The full scale of the need is not yet clear. But where there is need and where we can meet that need, Britain will act. And Britain's Department for International Development is already on the ground in neighbouring countries and is ready to assist. As others have already signalled for their countries, the United Kingdom will also support a resolution on the human rights situation in Iran, which would establish a special rapporteur. Historic events are unfolding in the Middle East. Millions of citizens are demanding their rights and look to the international community for support. We have a responsibility to encourage governments to meet the legitimate demands of their people and, where necessary, to protect the rights of their people. It is a moment of great opportunity in the Middle East. If change and development can be achieved peacefully, it will be the greatest advance in world affairs since Central and Eastern Europe changed so dramatically 20 years ago, and many of their countries entered the European Union. If instead violence takes hold, the risks for human rights and international security will be grave. We must support those working peacefully for more open societies and economic reform in the Middle East, so that in the months to come we see better observance of human rights across the region. This should include a particular emphasis on the economic and social empowerment of women. Respect for human rights rests on foundations that have to be built over time. Strong institutions, responsible and accountable government, a free press, the rule of law, and equal rights for men and women. The United Kingdom stands ready to lend its support and expertise to those countries looking to develop in this way. I would like to thank the High Commissioner for her tireless work in this area, in particular her prompt dispatch of a rapid reaction team to Tunisia and her commitment to send a human rights mission to Egypt. I would also like to commend the government of Tunisia for pledging to sign major UN human rights treaties and the Egyptian government's commitment to oversee the transition to civilian democratic governance. Both have made important steps in their reform programs, but there is still a vast amount to do. The expectations of the Tunisian and Egyptian people are high. Momentum on reform needs to be maintained so people know their governments are serious about change. During this time of unrest, it is important that the Human Rights Council shows strong leadership, making it clear that human rights abuses are unacceptable, no matter the context. Finally, we believe three things are necessary for the Council to operate effectively now and in the future. It should use independent experts and structures and work closely with civil society and national human rights institutions. Second, we should maintain a constructive dialogue to help meet our obligations, which is why the Universal Periodic Review has the potential to be such a valuable process. And thirdly, where states fail to meet these obligations, the UN, including this Council, should act to address violations as they occur. We will continue to champion the independence of the OHCHR so that the High Commissioner and her office are able to continue their valuable work. We all have a common interest in a Council better able to fulfill its mandate and to champion the rights and freedoms on which our collective security and mutual prosperity depend. Only an effective Human Rights Council will have credibility with the people whose rights we as states are obliged to protect and will be able to rise to the challenge of the extraordinary times in which we are living. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. William Hague for his statement. It's now my honor to invite
Well, William Hague expressing the sentiment that if, and it was a big if, the advances that have been made in the last 6 weeks in some countries can be continued across some others, then it would be the greatest advance since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Tarek Youssef from the Dubai School of Government still with us in the studio. We're hearing from so many people who possibly wouldn't have bothered to go if they hadn't known that there would be a forum such as this given the circumstances, but people like William Hague, Hillary Clinton expected very soon. Are we seeing simple platitudes or are we seeing real promises of action?
I think we're seeing real promises of action that have been triggered by events happening in the Arab world. This is quite stunning, quite dramatic. Just a few months ago, people were giving up on any sort of an agenda for good governance, democratization, or respect for human rights, especially in the Arab world. People accepted the durability of autocratic regimes as a fact.